Thank you, everybody, and welcome to the webinar, Navigating the Green Industrial Revolution. If you're expecting something different, you've come to the wrong place, so now's your chance to work that out. This is the first of our 2022 webinar series, and I think this year we're building an excellent portfolio of events, ranging from this one, where we'll look at what happened at COP26 and the key implications for UK businesses, to events such as investing in innovation, sustainability in design and design for life, developing your brand, how to develop skills at a time when there seems to be a huge demand for skilled people and a few people applying to do the jobs. With an event on decommissioning offshore oil and gas, although a little bit later in the year, I think we've agreed to do that in May. We'll be doing something on asset management, and for those that have got more academic interest, something on management strategy from the University of Strathclyde. But today we're really pleased to welcome Harry, Kay and Isatu from Ernst & Young. They'll be telling us what happened at COP26, how to get to net zero and things you can do, and the support available to businesses transitioning to net zero, and some more, but more of that later. But those of you who've been to a SEED webinar before will know that I usually like to start off, or SEED usually likes to start off with a short outline of, I'm going to break my rule and say for anybody who has their microphone on, who's not speaking, and their camera, it's a good idea to turn it off, because then we don't get noises off and some of the interferences. That said, you'll probably hear my dog barking for the dog walker at 11 o'clock, and Jane, you can edit that out of the video if you would. So as I was saying, I'd like to start with a short outline of SEED for those of you who've never been to a SEED event before. And those that have will know that we work to solve the operational issues raised by our member companies, and it's the nature of the problem itself that determines the way in which we'll respond. Most of you know who are not SEED members will know SEED for the free-for-all events like this one. We offer these on a regular basis, but it's not all that we've got to offer. If you do become a SEED member, you've got the opportunity to reach out to quiz other SEED members and learn from them about how they do things, to learn from and adopt the knowledge shared from peer-to-peer networking. And that's because we feel that the challenge your business faces could well be similar to that felt by or already addressed by another member company. So the solution may be close to hand if you go and look for it. If your issue is unique to your company, then it's even possible to engage in a one-to-one project with another member company, or more likely an academic partner who's there to identify a solution, and we can also help to facilitate this. Some people will know SEED for our executive education programs and our mentoring mix-up, but I'm not going to say much about that, and if you want to know more, do get in touch. And finally, SEED in 2020 was appointed as Cluster Builder Program Manager for the Advancing Manufacturing Cluster Builder Initiative. A little bit about the AMCB. That was established to create a national network, or a network of regionally based initiatives to improve the innovation performance of Scotland's small and medium-sized enterprises, to adopt contemporary ways of working and help businesses capitalise on new economic and public sector innovation opportunities. The network's designed to complement the new National Manufacturing Institute for Scotland by providing local access to complementary support and services to ensure that SMEs, wherever they are based across Scotland, are positioned to fully capitalise on advanced manufacturing opportunities that are available through this national resource, irrespective of location. The AMCF or AMCB is free at source, so do come and ask us about it and what it might do for you if that sounds of interest. So I think that's about enough about SEED, and it's about time that we turn to Harry, Kay and Isatu. Kay is going to run the presentation for us, and after Harry has spoken, there will be a time for questions. So please do ask what's on your mind. Use the chat box to ask questions and to introduce yourself, and generally involve yourself in the webinar. Ernst & Young has kindly allowed us to share the presentation afterwards, and we'll do that. And we're recording the webinar, and we'll be resharing the recording too. Finally, if we can go on to the housekeeping rule, we have done. Well done, Jane, you've preempted that. Usual housekeeping rules apply. Mute yourself when you're not speaking. Turn your camera off until you've got a question and want to be seen. Set your phone to silent and enjoy the presentation. And once again, thanks for coming. And over to Kay and Harry.
Fantastic. So bear with me and I will just share my screen.
It's always a tense moment, isn't there, when you see whether the screen will actually share itself.
Anything involving myself and IT is tense. Over to you, Harry. I think we are good to go. So I think we'd shared the contents in the agenda previously. So I guess in the interest of time, Harry, I'm just going to hand over to you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Kay. So in my day job, I spend my life working with our clients to help make their businesses more successful and more sustainable at the same time. And so what we're going to talk about is an element of that today. I'm trying to cover everything involved in sustainability would be tricky. So what I thought I'd do is probably pick up on the most topical part of sustainability, that's climate change. And certainly it's the one that pretty much all of my clients have been wanting to talk to me about in the last 3 or 4 months since COP26 finished. So I thought what I'd try and do in around about 15-20 minutes, then we'll have some time for questions, is to talk first of all about what happened at COP. And then secondly, what are the implications of that for business? And then thirdly, how can businesses go about dealing with those implications? How can they go about getting to net zero? And so let's launch into COP and what happened at COP. This is actually an excuse to show you some pictures that I took on my iPhone when I was there. So here you are. Let's start off. We're in the middle of the blue zone at COP. So this is the bit of COP where all of the people who are part of the conference, not the negotiators, but all the people who are part of the national delegations and some representatives from NGOs, they congregate every day. So thousands of people from all over the world, all of whom who have an interest in climate change meet here. And so what I'll do is try and pick out some of the important conversations or the important announcements that I saw in the 2 weeks that I was milling around with all of these people in Glasgow. And the first one actually came very early on. I think it came on the third day of COP. And there's a picture next of Rishi Sunak, Chancellor of the UK. And this is him making an announcement on Finance Day. So Finance Day was the day that all of the finance industries get together to talk about how they're going to tackle net zero. It's the day that Mark Carney announced the GFANZ, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, which is intended to channel trillions of dollars in the future towards green investment. But Rishi wasn't talking about that. He was talking about transition plans. And he made what for me was a very unexpected announcement. He said that all listed businesses and all financial services businesses in the UK must have a net zero transition plan complete by the end of 2023, and they have to publish that plan publicly. So in other words, he is saying to all British businesses, it's a condition now of being a listed business that you have a net zero transition plan. And if you don't, you're going to have to explain why that's the case. And we'll come back in a moment to why I think that's a tremendously important announcement. But for me, that was the most important of the governmental announcements that came out during COP. But the other really significant thing about COP is that actually it was the first time really that businesses had been present at COP in large numbers. And the guy you can see on the left there, this is my kind of eventual boss. This is Carmine Di Scipio, who is the chairman of EY globally. He's sitting next to the mayor of Freetown, and they're part of a panel who are discussing the role of net zero in cities. And this is a really interesting development, and it's a real change from previous COPs. In the past, at past COPs, businesses have been mostly outside the conference, and they've been regarded as the enemy. So businesses are part of the problem. And I think for the first time in Glasgow, businesses were regarded as part of the solution. And wherever I went, either in the conference centre or at many of the fringe events outside the conference, people greeted us very enthusiastically, and they were asking how we can contribute to solving climate change and helping the world to get to net zero. So I think that's a really key change. And certainly businesses themselves, certainly Carmine and many of the other business leaders who were there, see for the first time, not only are they welcome in these kind of conferences, but they see that they have a key role to play as one of the main actors who are going to decarbonize the world. So that was the other kind of big takeaway for me. But outside the conference hall, we still saw lots and lots of demos. This is a picture I took on just off George Square in Edinburgh. This is Extinction Rebellion, who were there in quite big numbers. And I spent quite a lot of time talking to some of the demonstrators, and it's very clear to me that they're not going to go away. That they're going to be here for as long as it takes the world to get to change its path to get to a much closer path to the Paris Agreement. And what's interesting about them is, although that they're doing the usual kind of things like gluing themselves to bridges and to the floor and so on, they were actually quite a cooperative bunch. So they in the right circumstances are keen to work with government, and they're keen to work with business. And so what I think we saw forming at Glasgow is the beginnings of a coalition of government and business and civil society that we're going to need if we're going to decarbonize the world, if we're going to reach the Paris Agreement targets. But I suppose we have to ask the question, was COP26 a success? And my final picture, I think, sort of summarizes my kind of view of whether COP26 was a success. This is a picture taken just outside the conference centre, about halfway through, I think. And I think that in some ways you can judge COP26 a failure, because what it didn't do, it didn't agree on a path to hitting the Paris Agreement. There was no global agreement that would keep warming to below 2 degrees and ideally 1.5 degrees. And a year ago, you could say that agreement was possible, but COP26 didn't reach that agreement. On the other hand, we did see an enormous number of positive steps forward. We've talked about GFANZ and the way that finance will probably change in the future. We've also seen businesses admitted. We saw many new pledges from nation states. So India and China pledging to get to net zero by 2060, not 2050, but 2060. We saw progress on deforestation and on phasing out coal. Not enough. I mean, best estimates say that this will result probably in warming of about 2.3, 2.4 degrees by 2100. And the Paris Agreement target is 2 degrees or under. But a significant step forward. So if you're a pessimist, you would say, well, look, we didn't reach agreement. That's a bad thing. It is a bad thing. If you're an optimist, you would say we made more than incremental steps forward. And when we get together in Egypt, we should have created more momentum that I hope will create further steps forward too. So COP, not a complete success, but I would say many successful steps forward. So that's what happened in Glasgow for the first 2 weeks of November. What do I think are the key implications for business from COP26? And as you can see from this slide that we've got on the screen now, businesses are feeling pressure to change from a whole series of angles, from investors, consumers. There are increasingly a number of legal cases being taken out against companies, insurance companies getting interested. But in particular, I see two major forces that have been strengthened as a result of COP. The first is financing. We talked about GFANZ. And what is clear now is that if you are a company that is greening up, if you're a company that has a clear track towards net zero by 2050, if you're a company that's behaving ethically, it's going to be an awful lot easier and cheaper to get finance in the future. I think Mark Carney announced $140 trillion or something of finance for net zero. A lot of people are very skeptical about that number, and quite rightly so. But there's no doubt that it's becoming much easier and cheaper now to get money if you are committed to climate targets and to ethical targets. And this hit home for EY recently when we were renegotiating our financing agreements, and our bankers said to us, well, we can roll over your existing agreement if you like, but if you'd like to access our ethical financing funds, then we can do that. You will be paying less money for your borrowing. However, we're going to want to see progress against a series of ethical targets. Those included net zero targets, but they also included things like diversity and inclusion targets. And that's a trend that is beginning, and I think we'll see that trend strengthen over the next few years, to the extent that if you have a credible net zero plan, published net zero plan that people believe in, I suspect financing over the next decade is going to be significantly cheaper for you than if you lack those kind of plans and that kind of preparation. And then the second big impact that's changed is on regulation. We mentioned this, Rishi Sunak's announcement, 2023, we're going to need to publish a climate transition plan. And that sounds like a pretty easy thing to do. Actually, it's not. Even for a very simple business, EY is actually, it's a very big business, but it's a very simple business. We're effectively a digital business with 300,000 people. For us, a net zero plan has taken us about a year to put together. For more complex businesses like most of yours, you'll need at least a year, I think, before you can put together a transition plan that you are proud of when it gets publicly reviewed. And if you're not a listed business and think you don't have to do this, well, I would pause a little bit before reaching that conclusion. I suspect that not only will the UK do this, I think all other countries will do it. I can't see the EU wanting to be left out of this, so I would expect them to put in place a similar kind of rule. And also, I suspect that this will move very quickly from listed businesses to all businesses. I think all investors are going to want to see a transition plan now as a piece of hygiene, if you like, before being willing to invest in organizations. So I think this is going to be something, for good or for ill, that all businesses now are going to have to come to terms with. So I think we can talk about some of those other drivers as well, and they are very important. Consumers and investors are getting increasingly focused on net zero. But I think regulation and financing are the two big things that came out of COP. So if we move on then to think about what's happening over the next few years, I think we are seeing the beginning of the green industrial revolution that we talked about in the title of this session. And if you've not seen Al Gore's latest TED Talk, I would kind of encourage you to go and have a look at it. It's a really interesting 15 minutes. The first half of it is the usual depressing 5 minutes or so on how the world is overheating and some of the terrible consequences of that. But the second half of it is around about 10 minutes on how Al Gore thinks that we will fix climate change. And he uses this phrase in it, which is that the sustainability revolution is the single business opportunity in the history of the world. So why is that? Well, he explains very, very clearly that the scale of change we're going to need to see if we're going to get from our current economy to a net zero economy is effectively, it's as big a change as we saw throughout the first industrial revolution. But as he puts it, this will be change on the scale of the industrial revolution, but at the speed of the digital revolution. So all of that change is going to happen over the next 30 years. And so his argument, and I think very much what I'm seeing as well at the moment, is that for a lot of businesses, this is going to be an enormous opportunity to enter new markets, to sell new products, or to serve new customers. And so we think that every organization needs to be thinking about their transition to net zero in that context, and that this is going to be an enormous change for business and an opportunity for many businesses. So how are we seeing the path to net zero? How is EY looking at this, and how are we dividing this up? And so look, we think that for all businesses, this is going to be a transformation. If you sit and think about your current business model at the moment, everything that you need to do today to serve your customers, to deliver your products, to create your services, everything that you do, from recruiting people, from marketing, manufacturing, distribution, selling, just general administration, all of that is going to have to be done in a way that emits no carbon. And that's going to be a transformation for all of us, even for the simplest of our businesses. Now, for some businesses, that's going to be a matter of survival. I mean, if you're an oil and gas business, if you continue to pump oil out of the ground or extract gas, then you're going to be going out of business. There is no way to decarbonize that business. So like BP, like other energy companies, you're going to have to become a renewable energy business. That is an enormous transformation. And if you don't make that transformation, you will not survive. It's true if you're an automotive business too. Petrol, diesel engines are disappearing very rapidly now. You're going to have to make electric, battery-operated vehicles or perhaps hydrogen vehicles. It's true in mining, and it's true in businesses like steel and cement manufacture. Unless you fundamentally transform the core of your business and your business model, you won't survive. So for some organizations, this is about transforming to survive. But for other organizations, this is about transforming to win. This is an enormous opportunity to attract new customers, to go into new markets, to create new products. So consumer products businesses, Unilever is probably the most probably the most famous, see this as a great way of effectively outcompeting other businesses by becoming green, by becoming more sustainable, by getting on the path to net zero as quickly as possible. Unilever are going to do it by 2039. And that's true of lots of other bits of business too. Life sciences, professional services like EY, technology, absolutely in that category as well. And I would think engineering businesses actually sit somewhere between what we've called transform to survive and transform to win. I think there are both threats and opportunities for engineering businesses that you'll have to come to terms with. But whether you see this as a transform to survive or a transform to win situation for the next few decades, whoever you are, you're going to have to transform. As I say, this transition plan that we're all going to have to do by 2023 is just the beginning of an enormous amount of regulation that will force us to change over the next few years. And I think, in terms of the regulations you've seen come out so far, frankly, we ain't seen nothing yet. So for all of this is going to be a transformation. And that's something that we're going to have to come to terms with pretty quickly. And although some of the leaders have done that, the BPs and the Unilevers of this world have come to terms with that transformation, I don't think most people have. So if you're starting from scratch, how are you going to go about it? I mean, it's pretty straightforward. This is the process that we take our clients through at EY. I'm not going to go through the detail of it, but broadly, there are 3 steps. First of all, you've got to get a plan together. And that consists of asking 2 questions. First of all, what do we need to change in our business model? What has to change in order to decarbonize? And then secondly, how are we going to do that? Over what period of time are we going to do that? How, what are we going to need to invest to do all of that? How is it going to happen? So the first thing to do is to create a really good plan for the next few years, probably for the next few decades. Second thing to do then is to transform the business, to raise the finance to do this, to transform the operating model and to make those changes work. And then finally, and this is the bit that a lot of people forget, you need to build trust in your transformation. Not only do you have to have a plan and execute that plan, you're going to have to demonstrate to your consumers, your customers, your employees, to your investors, to your shareholders, and to the market in general, that your plan is a good one and will get you to where you need to go. Because a great plan is marvelous, but unless you can communicate that plan, then it will frankly be not terribly useful. And you'll see the impact of that in your business. So that's the process. It's conceptually very straightforward. Plan, do, build trust. But actually, how do you go about taking a current business and changing it and making it net zero? And we think there are basically 6 plus 1 steps to doing that, what we call 6 decarbonisation levers. So these are the things you can do to your business to reduce or eliminate carbon in it. And I'm not going to go through all of these in detail. We probably haven't got the time now. They start, number 1, starts with the simplest, is making your business more efficient. If you make your processes more efficient, then you will also almost always not just save money, do things more quickly, but you will also reduce the carbon that you produce. Second thing on our wheel there, second slice of pizza, is greening your energy supply. That's something at EY we've done now. So all of our energy comes from green sources. We've had to create a new solar farm to do it, but that's where our electricity comes from in the UK. So that's actually, it's not a straightforward thing to do, but it's relatively straightforward. Then you move on to transforming your product. How do you move from creating high carbon products to low carbon products? Then you need to start looking at your value chain. All of the people who supply things to you, all of the people who take your products and take them to your customers. How do you make sure there's no carbon produced anywhere in that value chain? How do you move on to a basis of a circular economy? That's number 5 in the process. And if that isn't working, if you're an oil company, for example, one of those 5 things is going to reduce all of your carbon to 0, then you're going to have to look at number 6, which is changing your business model, fundamentally innovating and changing what you do. In the case of a BP, as I mentioned before, they're moving from being an oil and gas company to a renewables company. So that's how they're going to innovate their business model. And then finally, the plus 1, you can't get rid of all carbon from all business models entirely a lot of the time, and you certainly can't do it straight away. So for a period of time, you're probably going to have to look at compensating for the carbon you are producing or neutralizing that carbon. And so you are going to have a strategy for thinking about offsets and things like those. And I can see, Patrick, you've asked a question about that, so we'll come back to that in just a moment. That's kind of that's a really interesting area. So broadly, we think those 6 levers plus the one of compensation and neutralization are how you can go about getting your business to net zero. But as a starting point, we think there are 3 questions that kind of everybody should be thinking about at the moment. You know, probably famous quote at the top of this slide, you know, the best time to have started thinking about this was probably around about 20 years ago, but the second best time is now. And so I think there are 3 questions that everybody should know the answer to really rapidly, which is, first of all, do you know how climate change will impact your business? So do you know what it is you're going to have to change to get to net zero? Secondly, if you know what you're going to have to change, do you have a plan that's going to get you there? And in particular, can you meet the requirements that Rishi Sunak set out at COP26? And then thirdly, if you've got a system of carbon measurement and reporting in place, because without that, you're never going to be able to build trust with all of the stakeholders that you need to build trust with. So I mean, those are the 3 things that I'm talking to all of my clients about at the moment, and encouraging everybody, whatever it is they do, whatever their business is, to have really good answers to those 3 questions. So I'm going to stop now. Patrick, I mean, I'm going to hand over to you to chair this next bit, I think, which is the Q&A. Would you like me to start with the question that you've asked?
Well, thank you, Harry, and I certainly found that very interesting. Tried to take notes. There was just so much to cover. I'm sure there are questions in the chat box. You're very welcome to start with the question on carbon offsetting. This came about because when I was at Heriot-Watt University, we did a project with a business who unfortunately can't be with us today, where we tried to estimate the cost of carbon offsets for a business thinking ahead. And it's not an area I know an awful lot about, and would appreciate some thoughts from you, Harry, on that.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's a really interesting area. In the short term, it's fairly straightforward to figure out the cost of carbon offsetting. I mean, you can Google it, and if you Google it, what you'll see is that there's a range of costs today. So if you want to if you effectively want to pay money to someone to plant trees for you, which would sequester carbon, you can actually do that for as little as $2 or $3 a ton. Now you have to ask whether those are very high quality offsets, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But that's roughly the kind of lowest cost per ton of carbon for carbon offsetting at the moment. If, on the other hand, you'd like someone to suck carbon out of the air, carbon dioxide out of the air, and bury it in the ground, then you can do that too. That'll cost you something more like $1,000 a ton. Happens. A bunch of people called Climeworks are doing that in Iceland at the moment, and that's clearly the kind of the gold standard for carbon offsetting. You are actually literally taking carbon that has been removed, that is in the air, and removing it and locking it away effectively forever in the ground. And in between those 2 numbers, there's a kind of range of prices for carbon offsetting. At the moment, those prices are relatively low because not a lot of people are doing this. What you will see is that as more and more people want to buy offsets, you will see the price of those offsets rising. And if you actually have a look at the carbon price that the EU quotes post COP, it's probably risen by about $15 a ton for buying permits to emit carbon, and we think that will rise further. So I mean, different economists have different views, but probably in about 3 or 4 years' time, we'll probably see carbon priced at around about $150 a ton. And that's something for organisations to think about, because I know that a lot of people at the moment are saying, well, look, I can buy offsets really cheaply. I'm going to do the easy things when it comes to decarbonising my business, but frankly, it's going to be just much cheaper to buy offsets rather than decarbonising the harder bits of the business. And the answer to that is, well, yes, that's true today, but will it be true in a few years' time? I very much doubt it. And so it is important to look at both the current cost of high quality carbon offsets and then what's likely to be the future cost. And for that, you're going to have to go to some of the economists. You will get a range of views, but you'll see that the cost of carbon is going to probably go through the roof over the next few years. So that's.
Well, thanks for that, Harry. I guess a follow-on question to that is that a practical solution for a small business? You talk about a ton of CO2 without, and the context of how much CO2 is actually emitted by small businesses. There you are. It's not my dog. It's somebody else's dog barking. Yeah. Is that a practical solution at $15 to $50 a ton for a small business who I have no idea how much CO2 they emit in a year? Any thoughts on that?
Really depends on the business. I mean, if you're a digital business, you're probably emitting very little carbon. I mean, your servers are going to produce some carbon, your buildings are going to produce some carbon. You're probably actually your travel will produce the most carbon. So actually, that's probably offsetting as a really cost-effective solution at the moment. If you are an engineering business, then actually by the time you take everything, all of your materials into your business and distribution at the other end of it, you could be producing a lot of carbon. And so offsetting is going to be expensive even in the short term. And so it'd be well worth thinking about the long-term impact of investing in reducing carbon throughout the business. I mean, forget the environmental benefits, just the financial benefits of that kind of long-term investment are going to probably pay off many times over compared with offsetting.
Thanks for that. Don't be shy, audience, to come in if you want to ask a question. Put your hand up if needs be, or put things in the box. The first point that came into the chat box came from, I've never come across this surname before. Is it Davoud? Apologies if I've mispronounced it, from the University of Strathclyde. I'm going to come back to you because what I've done is, and you've agreed to talk about how the Strathclyde can help SMEs start the journey moving towards net zero. But I put another question in the box, which was directed at the audience. We got one answer from Lindsay Stewart. My question was, is the news that businesses will be required to have a net zero transition plan news to the audience? And if so, what steps have been taken to address this? Lindsay, you commented that you knew it was coming, but didn't realise the deadline was 2023. I suppose I could put you on the spot and say, well, now you know, what are you going to do about it? Any thoughts on that, Lindsay? Don't be shy coming forward.
Yeah, I'm going to speak to Strathclyde University. And seat.
And perhaps see why.
And shout help.
So is that the approach that other people on this call are likely to take? Help, we don't know what to do. Who's out there to help us? Is there an industry do you imagine to help people do this? Okay, silence at the moment. Davoud, do you want to talk about what Strathclyde offer is?
Good morning, everybody. As I mentioned, as part of Strathclyde University, we are collaborating with National Manufacturing Institute of Scotland alongside Ayrshire Council to help Scottish SMEs. What we do, as Harry pointed out, that planning is going to be a main part of net zero transition. We help SMEs with different format of helps and supports. Usually it starts with training, circular economy design analysis, cost modeling, design support, so post-design, even developing new products, material supports, business support, moving toward more servitization or even a new type of processes. We do live carbon analysis for products and for processes. We do carbon mapping. We do energy auditing, carbon auditing, and we help SMEs to have an action plan and roadmap development for them, just to make sure that they are aware where they're standing, where they want to be, and how they're going to achieve that. As I mentioned, what we do is free of charge. There are various forms of funds, grants available from governments, from different bodies that we are working with. And we help SMEs. We have started this project about 6 months ago. We had a really, really good turnaround, and a lot of the Scottish SMEs are keen. So I thought that I pointed out here as well that if anyone, any company is interested, we are willing to help them. Even if we do not offer that service, we try to identify experts that they are in the field, or particularly our aim is free of charge supports because of SMEs. We want to help SMEs. So what we do, we try to find experts and put them in touch, connecting the dots. But our main goal is to help SMEs by ourselves. We have a massive team that we have put in place 6 months ago, and as I said, it has a really good turnaround in Scotland.
Thanks, Dawood. Any questions for him? It looks at least one person's going to be following up with you already. So good to have made that connection in this way, and we should do a plug for our sponsor, yeah. And hopefully people will contact Case too and Harry about this as well. Dave Pearson, Director at Star and at Seed, you're a business of scale. Anything that you've heard here that you'd like to comment on?
Yeah, I really enjoyed Harry's presentation. Thank you very much, Harry. I'm also the chair of Seed, so on behalf of Seed, thank you for contributing this morning. I was at COP as well. The bit that frustrated me about it was there was an awful lot of chat around coal and moving away from coal. And in reality, and this is a very UK-centric perspective, so I appreciate this isn't for everybody, but the single largest carbon footprint in the UK is from burning gas. And that almost seemed to still be getting trotted out as a transitional fuel or a good thing to move to. And certainly if you're Poland and you're trying to decarbonise your electricity, then moving from coal to gas is probably a step forwards, albeit to a certain extent it's a dead end. So the question really is, how do you think we're going to move forward so that we actually see gas as part of the problem rather than part of the solution? Because the businesses I speak to as our group sustainability director, one massive American meat producing company, there's a twist in that, I suppose, but they've said we've decarbonised by 50% by sorting out our electricity, and now we're stuck with gas. What are we going to do? And yet they don't realise that you don't have to burn gas to heat stuff up. So where does that sit in your observations from all of this, that gas is really actually the biggest problem?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and I mean, the EU has just published its draft list of what it will regard as green when it comes to green financing, and gas is in there. So you're absolutely right, David. There's a big problem with that. I mean, I think that how can we sort it out? I think there are two in the UK. There are two ways we'll do it. I mean, the first is actually the market is kind of doing this already. Is changing the price of gas and making it relatively more expensive to burn is one way of doing it. Politically very, very difficult, as we're seeing at the moment. The other is persuading people that there are serious alternatives to it. And of course, there is another gas that we can burn, hydrogen, that can, in some cases, particularly for industrial companies, replace kind of natural gas, methane. And in fact, we did a piece of work with one of the big German steel producers, so that actually it got them off coal rather than gas, but they were replacing coal with hydrogen in steel production. So if we can begin to produce hydrogen at scale, and the UK should be well placed to do that, in the longer term, I mean, that's a sort of 10, 20-year solution. That's probably the way off gas. And then the other way, of course, is by increasing the amount of renewable electricity that we've got, which should fundamentally be a lot cheaper than gas in the next 10 years. And so making gas economically unattractive from that perspective. But there is no quick fix. Even in the UK, there is no quick fix to that.
It's I've sat in various European committees around this sort of thing. The bit that doesn't seem to get thought about is the efficient use of electricity with heat pumps. There's now heat pumps operating up to 160 degrees. So really burning or consuming electricity from a wind farm and getting 3 units of heat, or pushing it through a hydrogen process and getting half a unit of heat, the ratio is 6 to 1. So burning hydrogen is 18% as effective as a heat pump. Are you seeing businesses actually realizing that's a, that difference will never vanish in the spreadsheet of life? So anybody that moves from gas to hydrogen is taking their business into a very, very dangerous position, because hydrogen will be multiples of cost of methane.
Yeah, no, it will be. I mean, there are some things for which, I mean, as I say, for this kind of German company, they're just going to have to use hydrogen, because heat pumps, you'll never be able to power a blast furnace with heat pumps. But I mean, there are two issues with kind of heat pumps at the moment. The first is people are broadly unaware of what a heat pump is and what it can do. I mean, I'm surprised by the levels of ignorance, but nevertheless, that's where we are. The second thing is because we're not mass producing them, they're still relatively expensive, and they're quite a big capital cost up front. As I say, the price of gas at the moment has caused people to look for alternatives for the first time, not for green reasons, but just because they've seen the unit cost of one of their major raw materials go through the roof, and that's caused some companies I know to begin to look at heat pumps for the first time. But I mean, the government could do far more to incentivize not just heat pumps for use at home, but for heat pumps for use in industry as well.
We're seeing, we're not in the domestic sector, it's industrial, so district heating for cities, but the levelized cost of energy from a heat pump, about 25% is the capital cost and 75% is the cost of electricity. So the government are making electricity artificially expensive. It's £50 per megawatt hour at the base of the wind turbine in your picture. But by the time you buy it 2 miles down the road, it's £150. So how do we end up with a system that makes electricity 3 times the cost of producing it for people that want to use it sensibly to move away from burning gas? That's not a plan. That's just confusion.
It is, and that's the. I mean, if you want to criticise the government's plans, and they've set some very good targets. I mean, net zero for the UK by 2050 will be a great target to achieve. What they haven't done is to lay out the roadmap themselves, and they haven't laid out their own transition plan for how we change economic incentives to actually deliver that target. I mean, that's a much longer discussion, but we can certainly go into that.
Super. Well, thank you very much. And Carney's comments about if you find a home for capital, then the capital will flow were really inspiring. That kind of picked me up off the floor of depression of everybody talking about coal. But he basically said, if you create business models where capital can flow, then there's loads of money to invest in this stuff. But so create the right rules and you've got the solution will follow. So anyway, I will drop out, but thank you. That was really good what you were saying.
Thanks for that, Dave. There's one other person with their hand up at the moment, and it's Christian. You put something in the chat box as well, in terms, if you were going to talk about my question, which is where can people go, we can sit on that just for the moment, because there's a few people who have tried to respond to that. And I'm going to look to see if I can find 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll come back to where the help can be, and I'll bring you in there. So Hugh Fitzpatrick, not sure where you're from, Hugh, but you've said, when we're talking about net zero plans for 2023, is this covering scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions for businesses? That's a question for Harry, I think, and you might want to come on and elaborate as well.
It's a really good question. I mean, as I think I said it earlier, I was very surprised to hear that announcement. I wasn't expecting it. I was expecting him to say a few things, but not that. And so the first thing I did was immediately go to the Treasury website to find the details of these transition plans, and there aren't any. And actually, 2 months later, there still aren't any details. What they're saying is that they are. They're going to release details of that in the course of this calendar year, and would we like to make some suggestions about what a good transition plan will cover? So I can't give you any detail about that. I would strongly suspect, though, that they will cover scope 1, 2 and 3, frankly, because for most organisations, the bulk of their emissions are in scope 3, and if it doesn't cover scope 3, I'm not really sure what the point of the transition plan will be. So I can't answer the question, unfortunately, but that would be my bet.
The question for me is, does everybody on the call know what we mean by scope 1, 2 and 3? Would you like to elaborate, Harry?
Yeah, no, I mean, it straightforwardly, scope 1 emissions are the emissions that you create in your business yourself. So if you're producing steel in your business, that will create emissions. That will be a scope 1 emission. Scope 2 emissions are from the energy that you buy in to your business. So if I turn my light on in my office, I'm buying in electricity from somewhere. That electricity has probably created emissions. That would be a scope 2 emission. And scope 3 emissions are everything else. So in other words, the stuff that either comes into my business or that my products use when they go out of my business. So if I'm buying in steel into my business, someone will have to have dug that out of the ground. That will be a scope 3 emission. When I've finished, when I've finished shaping that steel, I sell it to my customers. They'll have to go on a delivery truck. That delivery truck will create emissions. That will be a scope 3 emission as well. So for most businesses, their emissions are in scope 3, which is that always makes them much more complicated to eliminate.
Thanks very much. Any other questions for Harry before we come on to support that's available for businesses who are going to be required to do this?
Sorry, this is Polly Middleton from LifeScan. Just a question on the scope 3 emissions then. If you're in a situation where you're part of a supply chain bringing in raw materials, converting materials, shipping on, how do the various businesses determine how much of that scope 3 emission is mine versus how much of that scope 3 emission is my suppliers or my distributors?
Well, the bad news, Polly, is that it's all yours. So if I mean,
but it's also therefore all theirs as well.
Yes, it is. It is. That's right. And this is what you find is that when I'm trying to decarbonize EY, I'm talking to the people who supply us with, let's say, laptops, and I'm trying to get them to reduce their emissions to zero. Also, those laptop manufacturers may be talking to me as a scope of emission, as part of their scope 3 emissions as well, because I provide them advice. I perhaps audit their business, so they need my emissions reduced to zero. So this becomes a very kind of interlocking web. So I guess the basic point here is that we all need to get to zero. For any of us to get to zero, we all need to get to zero.
Polly, happy with that answer?
Yes, I mean the complexity, I guess, if you're is potentially more if you're in an international situation. We're talking about a UK legal framework around expectations on a plan and so on and so forth. You start working with businesses in other countries that might have different legal frameworks themselves and who are, I don't know, either further ahead, which is a good thing, or further behind, which is a bad thing, and it's a more difficult thing to achieve, I guess.
Frankly, it's hideous. It's really, really difficult, and what that's meaning is that people are saying to their suppliers, we're kind of saying it to ours, which is we are pledged that we at least 75% of our suppliers by value are going to be net zero by 2030. So what that's going to mean, I think, is we're going to have to find some alternative suppliers for some products. Equally, people are saying to us, we're not going to hire you unless you're net zero by a certain date. So we're in the fortunate position that we're carbon negative already, but what that will mean is we will see people swapping suppliers wherever they sit in the world.
And do you think, sorry, it's kind of following on my train of thought. So we are a medical device manufacturer and our product is therefore governed by global regulations. A simple one in many cases is that every item that we sell has to include a large degree of paper labeling. Now, certain countries are starting to, Japan being an example, say, well, that could be electronic, it doesn't have to be paper, but within the European Union, for example, that requirement is still for a significant amount of paper instructions for use, which comes with, obviously, we have to pay to transport that, we have to pay to cut down the trees and print that, we have to, all of those kind of things. Pay for the carbon, effectively. I'm just wondering, do we think we'll see, is it EY's opinion that we'll see governmental regulations in adjunctive areas changing to enable companies to move to net zero in things like healthcare product regulation?
Yeah, I think they'll evolve over time, but they won't evolve in an organised and kind of disciplined way. So they'll evolve in a haphazard and an ad hoc way, I think. So sometimes that will help you, and other times it won't. I mean, I think it's almost impossible for any business to get to, let's say, 2050 and produce zero carbon emissions in scopes 1, 2, and 3. And you know, I mean, I think you can probably get to, most businesses can probably get to 98, 99%, but there'll always have to be some kind of what I've called compensation or neutralization having to go
on. Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask a question that Sheena asked. Does Scope 3 include product end of life disposal? And then disappear for 20 seconds because my dog walker has arrived. Sheena, over to you and Harry for a second.
Yeah, I guess I was just really interested to understand whether Scope 3 does include that full end of product life, what happens to it afterwards and disposal of that, and how much control do you have over that, I guess?
Well, bad news is that it does, or the good news, depending on which way you look at it, is that it does include, Scope 3 does include that. And so this is one of the main reasons that people are getting interested in circular economy. So the idea here is that, in a sense, you know, products can either be recycled or renovated and reused. So yes, I mean, you never lose responsibility for your carbon emissions, even after the product has been used by a customer or customers for 20 or 30 years. All of it gets included in the calculation.
I think that's really positive, actually, as you say, from a circular economy perspective. So it does provide us with opportunities there. Yep, thank you for that.
Okay, thank you, Sheena. Any other questions before I give Christian his moments of fame? All right, thank you very much. So there were one or two comments about where help outside of what I presume EY might offer. And one of the persons who answered that question was Christian. There's your 5 minutes of fame, Christian. Would you like to come in and comment?
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Sorry, I'm aware the conversation kind of moved on after I'd raised my hand and then just completely forgot to take it down. Thanks very much, Harry, for the presentation. It was the stuff we've been looking at for a while, and you know, we'd like to think we've got a decent grasp on a lot of things, but Scope 3 is still something that you can lose sleep over if you spend too much time on it. So I wanted to touch on the fact that when we were talking about carbon reporting, it's something that we've worked on, and for SMEs in particular, we've created essentially a Secker Lite, which we can bespoke to small businesses, and it's just a conversation that we'd be happy to have if anyone has any questions around carbon reporting and how to measure those changes. We found when we started, making change was quite hard to do when you didn't have any way to measure it. So we spent the best part of 2 years kind of working on a way to do that, and have found that not only has it been helpful for ourselves, but it's also quite adaptable to SMEs and small businesses looking to do something similar. So that was it really. So thanks for that. The floor, Patrick. Just wanted to cover that and let people know if they had any questions. We'd be happy to chat about that.
No, you're welcome. I'll probably make an introduction to Harriet Watt as well, who couldn't make it today, but I think there's some synergies there for you. Steve, Scottish Enterprise help and assistance. 2 minutes on that, if you'd like. I'm conscious also, because I don't want to keep our guests, our speakers, online for too long, because we've got a lot more to cover through Kay and these two.
I would probably defer to Ian if Ian Carstairs is on the call. It's his area of expertise. Ian, are you there?
I am, yeah, Steve, thanks for popping that in the chat. Yeah, Scottish Enterprise do have a team of sustainability specialists who will work directly with companies to help them reduce their environmental impact while gaining a business benefit. So a couple of tools that we have, including a net zero accelerator tool. It's a high level view to help companies understand where they are on their net zero journey and how they might improve it. I'll not take over any more of your time on that one though, but I'm more than happy through the link that Steve posted. You can send an inquiry if you're interested in finding out more.
Thanks very much for that. One more on that point, I think, is John Maslin. Are you still on the line, John? Did you want to comment on your comment in the chat box?
Thanks, Patrick. we work specifically on the energy side. So we as Locogen, we work with businesses. We're working a lot with distilleries around the UK at present, looking at their challenges with high energy loads. But obviously, this is wider, a lot wider than just energy. Although energy is one of the first areas that I think many businesses will look at. Yeah, we do pass companies off that come to us to others that look more generally at their net zero objectives. And I just put a couple of companies that we will work with in the future. They're both got Edinburgh or Scotland offices, so they do work in Scotland as well. So I just wanted to raise their awareness that there's different ways here and different people out there to help companies address this issue. So I'll just leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to cut the Q&A off at this point. Maybe an opportunity to catch up with Harry after the event or online. And now I'd like to bring in Kay, who's going to talk to us a little bit about where we can get help financially and what we can do to offset some of the costs of the innovation. Thanks very much, Kay.
Fantastic, thanks, Patrick. And just to check, have we got until 1:15?
You have until the audience disappears.
Right, probably about 10 past.
Sorry, somebody is saying hello, and I can't see who that is. Is that a question for the audience, for the speakers? If not, maybe you could turn off your microphone. Kay, please continue.
No problem. So what I'm going to do is, we've got quite a lot of slides to get through here, but I think in the interest of time, if we give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour, and then if there's any follow-up, we're happy to do it offline. So I guess a lot of what Harry's spoken about already is about, the drive of businesses to plan, to do, and to make progress. And I think obviously it was quite pertinent, Harry, when you spoke about sort of transforming to survive or transforming to win. Now, I guess where a lot of businesses would fall down is when they think, well, you've maybe got a pipeline of projects, you've got a pipeline of things to do, and then added on top of that, have this drive to try and have a sustainability goal as well. And it obviously puts a lot of demands on cash for businesses. So one of the things we focus on a lot in EY, and a lot of our clients come to us asking for support in, is how to access funding in the form of cash grants. And there's a lot of strategic benefits of grants, because obviously if you do have 101 things to do, if you can get grant funding to support some of those more risky projects or to help expedite some projects, then obviously you are getting better ROI, you are improving your products, and you are actually able to drive that sustainability agenda forward. And I think that's where we're seeing the government bend and flex a lot now in terms of how they offer support to businesses. So the grant funding landscape, I'm going to hand over to Isa to do a quick tour of where we are in terms of the landscape right now.
Thanks, Kay. And I think very quickly on the landscape. I think for grant applications, it's very important to understand the key drivers behind a grant, right? So for public funding especially, there are typical policies and investment agendas where the government is looking to create impact in certain areas. It's a big topic, and the landscape changes frequently, as we've already had from a few speakers. So there is, I think, a real benefit in staying on top of some of these explicit and often sometimes very subtle changes that evolve over time. And we've kind of summarized the current snapshot through the government's 10-point plan, which was announced by the Prime Minister in late 2020, I believe, and it has become the main vehicle through which we've seen funding towards sustainability projects arise from. But the 10th point, I guess, in the plan, specifically green finance and innovation, lays out how the government is going to incentivize some of the green industrial revolution. And as part of this, introduce the NZIP, which is the Net Zero Innovation Portfolio, which is a £1 billion fund that was announced and succeeds the Energy Innovation Programme that you may well be familiar with. This ran for the previous 4 years, and the NZIP is looking to run all the way to 2025. And most of the funding calls that we've seen in the last years emerge from the NZIP pot of money, and is based on these key priority areas at the bottom of the slide. But speaking more broadly as to why this is relevant, I think it's important to have a deeper understanding of the policy regulations and agendas, as well as the impact that is being sought through the funding, so that you can tailor and, I guess, present your application to meet those needs. Whilst you may have a highly attractive project that suits your needs, funding is typically highly competitive, and the funder will be looking for the best application that meets their needs. So I think it's important to understand how to navigate that, build relationships. I think we heard from Scottish Enterprise in terms of how they're able to support some of these transitions. So it's, I think, linking with those key stakeholders as well within the ecosystem to make that happen.
Okay, so I guess moving on to some live grant examples, I think a lot of the things that Harry spoke about again are really relevant to some of the open funds from government just now. And I think historically what we've seen in the UK grants landscape is there's very much been a drive to funding businesses who are looking at innovative projects, who are hiring staff, who are maybe expanding. And what we've now seen is that actually there's been a bit of a frame shift, and it's all about the creation of green jobs and what companies are doing with their existing manufacturing facilities to help decarbonise. And one of the grants that we've seen come out more recently, and it's got sort of biannual or triannual calls, it's called the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund. It's a bit of a mouthful, so we call it the IETF, but this is a fund that's actually coming out from BES, so it's central government. And while it covers England and Wales, there's also a Scottish fund that comes straight from Scottish Government as well. And basically what the fund is looking to do is targeted at specific businesses. So if you're a manufacturing business, if you're a data centre, or if you're involved in mining and quarrying or the recovery and recycling of materials, you can be eligible to apply for this grant. And I think that's quite important because a lot of the foundation industries are those very kind of carbon intensive emitters or kind of energy intensive businesses. So I guess it's nice to see the government kind of target that and help those companies really transform themselves. So the IETF basically seeks to look at an existing facility, and it challenges a company to think about how they can either reduce their energy consumption or how they can decarbonise their footprint. So for example, if you're a company who's running really energy intensive things like anything involving heating, drying, cooling, what could you do in terms of maybe replacing your equipment to get more energy efficient equipment? And obviously there's going to be a cost implication there. So if you want to go out and replace boilers or replace your vacuum blowers, if you want to go out and buy energy efficient ones, you're going to probably pay over the odds as to what you would for a kind of like standard class model. And what the fund looks to do is to incentivise you to make that extra expenditure and over the lifetime of the project to get those energy savings. So actually the ROI of the project over 5 years is probably attractive, but the grant wants to incentivise you to do it more quickly. And the second strand of the grant is looking at decarbonisation. Now, conversely, actually, if you're trying to decarbonise, you might find that you inadvertently end up using more energy, but that's fine, as long as you can demonstrate that what you've done is kind of reduce the carbon emissions of your entire footprint. And the government's really keen to support those companies that are maybe looking to do a project at one facility, but then actually roll it out on a wider scale throughout the UK. So the fund is really attractive. I think one of the biggest grants we've seen go out recently is about £7 million. And the current round is open in England and hopefully the Scottish one opening soon. And this is, as we see, very much a frame shift in how companies apply for funding because it is competitive and it is about putting in the right bid for the right project. So I'm going to hand over to ISA2. There's another fund called the Industrial Fuel Switching Competition, which again is very much in the same vein.
Thanks, Kay. And this one is an upcoming grant. It's opening in September 22, and foil switching is an area we currently support a number of clients with the application. And I thought it was interesting when we were talking about electricity, gas, and hydrogen. And this fund is specifically targeting projects like that. And I guess that's because there's a lot of research that shows that achieving net zero targets by 2030 or 2050 requires a near complete industrial decarbonisation, and switching industry from high to low carbon fuels would be vital in that journey. And as the name implies, Industrial Fuel Switching Fund, it's a dedicated fund to support innovations in the development of pre-commercial fuel switching and pre-commercial fuel switching technologies for the industrial sector. The first phase of this competition ran at the end of last year, so it's closed, the first phase, which looked at the feasibility studies, but the second phase, which is focused on demonstration, will provide some opportunities for projects where feasibility phase 1 is not required. So if you're beyond feasibility, there could well be an opportunity to benefit from this round. The second phase project, according to BES, should demonstrate an entire fuel switching solution, so key components or prototype in a relevant environment, and depending on what is possible within the time and budget constraint of the competition. So it gives different lots that you can apply to, as you can see on the slide there, different technologies. But it's also key though to bear in mind that BES is promoting technologies that do not, it's not promoting technologies that do not fit within the net zero objectives. So it's good to look at those list of technologies that are excluded and be familiar with those for your projects. This also funding is given through the SBRI network, so it's 100% funded because it's a procurement contract, something to be mindful of as well. I believe that was it for the first switching, Kay.
Fantastic. So I'm going to skip over a few slides. We were going to go into a bit of detail about some of the triggers for funding, but actually I think just linking back to Harry's presentation, it's kind of clear that there's a lot of push on companies to decarbonise, to be energy efficient. So in the interest of time, I think we'll just maybe skip on to some case studies to really illustrate what we can do with clients. So thinking about the way we work with our clients, we tend to work quite strategically and think about actually, you know, what are those long-term objectives? What are you trying to do? And then almost sort of break that down project by project. Kind of develop out the concept of the project. What are you trying to achieve? What are things like your ROI? What are your energy efficiencies? And then sort of line that up with where the government priorities are and try and help companies almost map the grants landscape. So what is there and what do we think is likely to be coming out based on sort of government policy documents and such like. And, you know, we do help obviously clients with the grant applications and to navigate that process. But I think, you know, talking about grants, it's not the only way to fund a lot of projects, and it is a bit of a trifecta where, you know, if you're applying for grants, you don't necessarily have to preclude yourself from making the most of R&D tax credits and potentially from capital allowances as well. So we tend to think about things on a very holistic scale and think about that longer term picture. You know, if you can get tax incentives back to fund things retrospectively, how can grants then slot in going forward to help you make those projects happen? And I guess one of the best ways to really bring this to life is to think about some case studies. And one of our clients that we've had in our books over the past few years is actually a global consumer goods company with quite a big global footprint and several energy intensive manufacturing facilities in the UK. And they've got very ambitious global sustainability targets, which they've shared with us over a number of years. And we've worked with them probably over the past 2 years to help them apply for 3 funds. So they had 2 grants through a fund called the Industrial Heat Recovery, which is no longer open, and it was succeeded by the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund, where they had a grant as well. So, I mean, in a very short frame of time, we were able to look at what they were doing from a capital expenditure point of view and to help them implement 3 projects, which were all grant funded. And I think when you look at the pie chart here about 28 to 30% of their total funding came from grants. And what it did do was help their projects sail through appropriation committees because they had a better ROI, and it really helped demonstrate that actually if we're to roll these out to other facilities, we can make these changes and really expedite our sustainability targets. Now, we work with that client on an ongoing basis. It's important to understand what's going on cross-departmentally, because talking about decarbonisation, there's also a lot of other funds, for example, that are looking at how to reduce plastic packaging, that are looking at how to reduce, you know, the waste from the end-to-end value chain. So it's really important to think about not just what you're doing from a capital investment point of view, but actually across all the departments, what are you doing that could be linked into a sustainability project? We've also worked with, and I'm just jumping over some slides here, we've worked in all sectors, so not just consumer goods, but food and drink, and I'll hand over to Isa too.
Yeah, I guess following on from the case studies, this particular client had an incredible and ambitious vision to innovate within a space that had traditionally experienced little change in Scotland, and where traditionally other countries also provided better environmental conditions for whether the technical R&D, the team that would be working on the project, and also better return on investment. So central, I guess, to the success of this application was the fact that our client was passionate about the impact they can make in Scotland, driven by a strong social and sustainability agenda to make substantial impact. So we used that, I think we fed up that passion, and this grant funding was really the last resort the client had in order to keep this key R&D in Scotland. And the EY team, understanding the client's business, brought together all the key stakeholders from the company, like Kay was saying, understanding actually what are the different departments within the company that would make this a strong application. And that's the same philosophy we took with this client. From the technical, commercial and financial operation department, brought together all the key stakeholders. And as highlighted on the 4 points on the slide, this included scoping the initial business outline and expenditure profile, which we will send to the funder. We led the relationship with the funder and created and submitted the full application that was required. We also led the third-party meetings with the due diligence provider and negotiated some of the terms and conditions of the fund as well. This was successfully secured about £5 million grant from a portfolio of 2 funds in order to meet their company's strategic needs and establish this project in Scotland, as well as moving towards their own sustainability agenda and achieving that. So that was a really, I think saying a case study like that seems like it's very, we did that in the space of a week, but it's not. I think it does take a lot of communication throughout the whole department, taking a very holistic approach to seeing where we can support the client.
Fantastic. I was actually, Patrick, I'm just conscious of time. I don't know if you want to swap over to a Q&A session.
Apologies, I'd muted myself. Very happy to do that. As with all the best webinars, they run over hugely. There are still 40 or so people here listening to you talk. The others, we have to find a way, and for everybody on the call, of sharing what you've spoken about on opening lines so that you can connect up directly. I've already put in the chat box, for example, that anybody hopefully everybody's happy that we share their contact details with you to follow up directly. But yes, if there are calls on funding, if there are questions on funding for Kay and ESA too, we could probably have done a whole event on that alone. I can see I had a question from Ian, or a comment from Ian Carstairs, saying that call 2 of IETF closed in December but will be reopened in summer 2022. Is that the Scottish IETF, Ian? But whilst you're thinking about answering that, any other questions that that you want to ask of Kay and ESA too, please do. I'm certainly interested in IETF and in industrial fuel switching competition, which I'd not heard of before, and we'll share with our members.
It is the Scottish version that closed in December. Just going through assessment still just now.
All right, thank you, Ian. Thanks, Ian. Is that something you'd heard of, Dave? The industrial fuel switching competition? Dave Pearson? Dave may have popped out for the moment. Questions for Kay and ESA too?
I was actually just going to pick up on one of the comments that I've read in the chat box here about life cycle analysis. And one of the funds that we've dealt with before, which is now closed, it was dealing with the reduction of plastic packaging, called Smart Sustainable Plastic Packaging, another bit of a mouthful. And we had several companies go forward for the funding, and what the funder actually demanded as an appendix item was a full life cycle analysis of the project. And a lot of companies fell down on that because it's not necessarily something that all companies would do. And I just wonder if anybody has any kind of like thoughts or comments on, you know, is that something you would typically think about doing for a project, or is it something that you'd be kind of needing support with?
Floor's open for anybody who wants to respond to Kay. I know Harriet Watt, especially in construction, would often volunteer to do life cycle analysis as a consultancy. Is it something that the EY offer? Billy, you've put your hand up. You asked the question. Do you want to comment?
Yeah, it wasn't so much a question as a comment, but the reason behind it is that you constantly see large companies, supermarkets saying we're getting rid of all plastic. Almost all life cycle analysis that has been published shows that in terms of packaging, plastic is one of the lowest carbon footprint. So I'm glad to hear that projects are being challenged on a life cycle analysis, because a lot of projects that are being done to reduce plastic pollution are pushing up carbon footprint.
Well, it'd certainly be an area that that I think would fit quite well into the seed events calendar, and we can certainly think about how we do that. We've got a number of packaging companies in membership, so yeah, Billy, catch up with you after the event. Perhaps also Kay, Stu, and Harry too, to think about what we might do. There is a question, Kay, for you, I think, from Zoe Yule. She's asking for the best resource website, news pages to keep up to date with changing grants funding options. And that's a question that I've always been perplexed about for 20 plus years or so. And I don't think anybody's actually cracked it in the sense of that, other than perhaps Innovate UK Knowledge Transfer Network, who are very good at keeping people up to date with the grants that they offer. But it's not holistic in the sense of it. They just focus on themselves, I believe.
It's a really good question, actually, and the honest answer is there's no one-stop shop, unfortunately. So I guess what we do as a team is we just look at all the disparate websites and just draw everything together into our own database. And I think that's something that we hear back from our clients all the time. Like, we'll flag something to them and they say, we've never heard of that. Where did you hear about it? But I know that Scottish Enterprise has recently launched a kind of database where you can log in and see all of the grants on a sort of Excel file. That's helpful. Obviously, Innovate UK has got its own website. You can look on the UKRI website, which involves Innovate UK and all academic partners as well. But where we see the confusion happening is that now a lot of funds are coming direct from BES, and they don't necessarily always appear on the Innovate UK website. So unfortunately, I can't give you a straightforward answer. It's just a case of going through all of the different portals and kind of coming up with your own answer. That said, the KTN and Scottish Enterprise are good at signposting as well.
Thanks for that. Okay, Danny Hood, who runs one of the 12AM CF projects in our cluster, has left us now, but he's put a comment saying he'd like to see more info on how SMEs can get involved. Now, I assume, well, I'm not sure what specifically he's referring to, and I think he's gone now. But I think that might be a question for you, Harry, and it might be good if we connect you up with him. So if you're happy to, that you can follow up directly. He's in the aerospace business, and the project that he supports supports the aerospace industry across Scotland. Alison Reith from North Lanarkshire, you comment, you want to jump in? Fiona Schaefer's shared the Scottish Enterprise database link, so thanks for doing that, Fiona, and nice to see you.
Yes, thanks very much, Patrick. Yeah, it's just to flag up that also at a local level, there is often funding pots available, particularly for SMEs, and that's something that we'll see increasingly. So I think, you know, as each local authority is setting its own net zero targets, depending on what industries are prevalent to them, they're looking at ways to assist their local businesses. So there is funding available, and there is a lot of dialogue going on to try and encourage companies to speak to their local authorities, so that going forward we can also look at where the best resources should be put with this. So I think it's one of these things that is a bit of a jigsaw puzzle at the moment when it comes to funding, and we are certainly looking at trying to pull together what's available locally, because one of our roles is also to signpost businesses to what's out there.
Thanks, Alison. There's a comment from Lindsay here, which I was going to add to. Firstly, as with many great webinars, and I think this has been fantastic. So thanks to Harry, to Kay, and Istu. It kind of opens up other avenues that people want to explore. What Alison referred to and Lindsay has asked is there a specific department with the local authorities funding available? Now, we had a chat with another local RDA the other day where this came up. And we feel that it will be something that we would like to address. Where can SMEs get funding from regional development agencies and local authorities? But of course, that funding differs from authority to authority. So anything we do is never going to be relevant for you can't please all the people all the time, I suppose, to paraphrase a very famous quote. But yeah, it would be something to think about. I don't know if you guys at EY address local authority funding at all.
We do more so in England at a kind of regional level, but I think, you know, with a lot of the funds getting distributed slightly differently, then we're definitely going to get more into local authority funding, especially for some of our SME base here in Scotland.
Okay. Right. Our audience has dwindled. Those that are left, I'm sure, have continuing interest in talking, and you've got a floor open to you at the moment if anybody wants to jump in and talk about something in respect to sustainability. If I count to 10 and don't hear anything, then what we'll do, I think, is say thanks to the EY team, and perhaps think about doing something again with you in the future.